Okay, so hi everyone, welcome. I'm Tiffany Leonis, and I will be the technology facilitator for this session. So please let me know if you have any questions or difficulties. This is the Computational Thinking with an Equity Lens session, which is an expertise connection session. It was designed for leaders in the Circles community with expertise on a topic to 1, share information and examples with participants who want to learn more about a topic. 2, provide a forum for participants to discuss how they might incorporate the topic into their own work. And 3, broker connections between community members around a topic. So as you go through this session, I hope you get a chance to learn and think about what to take to the strategy sessions tomorrow, where we start to make plans for how we can remake broadening. And before we dive in, I'm going to turn it over to our session facilitators to quickly introduce themselves. Okay, and we could start with Quinn. Do you want to lead things?
Sure, yeah, alphabetical. My name's Quinn Burke. It's great to be with everybody today. Looking forward to a good conversation, discussion. I'm going to be talking a little bit about teacher endorsement and certification through micro-credentials. And I'm at Digital Promise. Been here for a little over 3 years, focusing on computational thinking research. And I will pass it over to Jill.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. My name is Jill Denner. I'm a senior research scientist at a nonprofit organization called ETR, stands for Education, Training, and Research. And I'll be talking a little bit about the history of the computational thinking term and some of my work related to it.
And hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Raspberry. I serve as a director for the Professional Learning and Leading Collaborative. It's a long name. At the Friday Institute for Educational Innovation at NC State University. That's a lot to put in there, but at least I didn't give you all the acronyms to memorize. I have only been on the job here a little over 2 months, but my work focuses in on virtual support for educators, and have been in this world with computer science and computational thinking for about the past 7 years.
Okay, thank you everyone for the introductions. So we'll start our presentation with Dr. Jill Denner.
Thank you, Tiffany. So the Circles team included this session on computational thinking because there's a lot of debate about what computational thinking is. And just a brief alert, if you came here for the definition, you're not going to get the final definition, but we're going to talk about some different definitions and what it means. So I'm going to start off by providing one of the definitions that we've seen around what computational thinking is, sharing some recent history related to that term, because I think this is an important context for the conversation about equity and computational thinking. So this term computational thinking was first used, we believe, by Seymour Papert in 1980. But can you put the next slide, please? It was really this paper by Jeanette Wing that came out in 2006 that popularized this term. And she wrote, computational thinking is a fundamental skill for everyone, not just for computer scientists. To reading, writing, and arithmetic, we should add computational thinking to every child's analytic ability. So this paper really sparked a flurry of work in computer science education. And in the next several years, groups around the world tried to define computational thinking in lots of different ways. And there's been a lot of debates about what it is and what it isn't. Some of the definitions really focus on computational thinking as formulating problems and solutions that can be carried out by a computer. So the one in the next slide is the one that I tend to use. Says that computational thinking is a problem-solving practice that includes, but is not limited to, formulating problems in a way that enables us to use a computer and other tools to help solve them, identifying, analyzing, and implementing possible solutions with the goal of achieving the most efficient and effective combination of steps and resources, automating solutions through algorithmic thinking or a series of ordered steps, logically organizing and analyzing data, representing data through abstractions such as modeling simulations, and generalizing and transferring this problem-solving process to a wide variety of problems. I like this definition in part. It was created by actually a large group of people over a number of meetings that was led by the International Society of Technology Education, or ISTE, and the Computer Science Teachers Association, or CSTA. And this was published in 2011. There are also definitions of computational thinking that go beyond the automated version of computer science. So they talk about computational thinking as a way of reasoning about systems that may or may not be automated. So here we are 15 years after Jeanette Wing's publication. There's still not a common definition. So a lot of us spent a lot of time trying to define it. And at a certain point, there was a shift to working on how can we engage students in this computational thinking idea, right? And so people went beyond just trying to focus on the thinking to talk about what some call the dispositions that enable people to think computationally. So in the next slide, include a list of the dispositions from that same report. And these dispositions that were believed to enhance CT skill building are confidence in dealing with complexity, persistence in working with difficult problems, tolerance for ambiguity, the ability to deal with open-ended problems, and the ability to communicate and work with others to achieve a common goal or solution. And so, let's see. There's also a great paper that actually was presented in 2012 at a conference by Karen Brennan and Mitch Resnick, and it talked about computational concepts, practices, and perspectives, which is also another way of looking at different aspects of computational thinking. But overall, the belief was that in order to teach computational thinking, we need to know how students were thinking about themselves as they worked on the computer. And so a number of us who were running different programs across the US about this time became interested in how can we teach students to think computationally and to also build these dispositions. So we believed if we could figure this out, we could engage a broader and more diverse group of students in computer science. So in the next slide, I'm going to show you what we came up with. So after a long series of meetings, we identified a 3-stage progression for engaging youth in computational thinking within rich computational environments. And so there's this 3-part series, the use, modify, and create. Students start out by using a system, by modifying it, and then going through this cycle of creation where they test, analyze, and refine. And as this diagram shows, moving from a not mine to a mine state, right? And this was published in 2011. Irene Lee was the lead author here. And my team used some early game programming systems that were out before Scratch got really popular, things like Alice and Kodu and Stagecast Creator. And we had students start out by using or following steps to replicate a program. And then we had them modify the code to make something different happen. And then we had them create their own computer games. And so in this way, we were using this cycle, this UMC cycle. Use, modify, create has been promoted widely as a means to scaffold students' learning of computational thinking, while also allowing them to personalize the work and allow for creative adaptations of pre-existing computational artifacts. And there's been a lot of research on this framework. Our studies show, as well as others, that this kind of scaffolding can increase students' ownership and engagement in computational thinking. So the next slide is about assessments. So if we believe computational thinking is important, then we need to know how to measure it, right? People have used a number of strategies to measure computational thinking. One is a pre-post multiple choice assessment. So for instance, my team created what we called the fairy assessment, where we had students read block-based code, and then they had 4 choices. They had to pick the right answer to the question about what would happen if the code was played. Task-based assessments are also done, for example, asking students to take a set of instructions that are basically been mixed up and to do something, a set of instructions for doing something that are mixed up and then put them into the right order. And then people have also created a number of rubrics to look at artifacts. So my team created a rubric to analyze children's games, the games that they had programmed, and it was used to measure what we call their game computational sophistication. So we coded their games by looking at how they put simple programming constructs together into higher order patterns and mechanics. And we found that not only did this measure computational thinking, but the more sophisticated their games, the more fun the game was to play. And Shichi Grover here, I have a quote from her because she's done a lot of work in the field of assessment and computational thinking. And she says we need multiple measures or systems of assessments that are complementary, attend to cognitive and non-cognitive aspects of learning computational thinking. These include directed and open-ended programming assignments, multiple choice formative assessments, artifact-based interviews, and summative assessments. So next slide. So how does this relate to equity? I'm just gonna, nope, go back, please. Yeah, so this is a new report that just came out. Just wanted to call your attention to it because this is an international report. They used a task-based assessment of computational thinking, and they found that students from less advantaged backgrounds, which they based that on measures of socioeconomic status, have lower levels of computational thinking skills. And so this is a clear indication here, some data behind what many of us know already, is that the opportunities to learn computational thinking are not equitable. So the next slide, please. So, I started out talking about Jeanette Wing's paper in 2006, and she said that computational thinking should be as common as reading, writing, or arithmetic. We know that it's not, right? There are not opportunities for all students to engage in computational thinking. There's been some progress since all this work started. We're seeing an increasing number of programs that engage youth in computational thinking about the issues that are important to them. We're seeing an increasing number of schools integrate computational thinking into core subjects. And we're also seeing more and more universities who are working on preparing K-12 teachers, administrators, and staff to teach computational thinking. And so some of these attempts are really attempting to address also the dispositions that help to engage a more diverse group of students in computational thinking. But there's obviously a lot of work to do. So I'm going to leave you with my last slide, a question to ponder. How are you using or see the potential to use an equity lens in your research or your work with students that include computational thinking? And so I hope this kind of broad, quick overview of some of the history of computational thinking sparks some of your ideas and questions about the computational thinking term. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. It looks like we don't have any questions right now, but I'm guessing that others may have a chance to come up with some to either put in the chat, and also we'll have that open Q&A at the end. So Jill set up things really well in talking about what is needed for students learning with computational thinking. But we all understand in order for students to be successful, we need to have teachers who have the knowledge and skills necessary to teach computational thinking. And so my piece will be looking at closing the gap, broadening participation through teacher preparation and support. Next slide, please. Through this and kind of looking at the state of teacher preparation right now, the study back in 2015 did an overview of 21 papers on computer science and computational thinking preparation. They came up with the following findings that I'm sure will not be unfamiliar to you all. One, there's a lack of qualified teachers to effectively teach computational thinking, and again, CS more broadly. Two, that the PD is significantly less as compared to, say, other subjects such as math and science. Three, the PD that is available tends to be short with limited ongoing support. So more of kind of the drive-by PD, if you will, the terms often used in the field. Four, there's little to no collaboration between higher ed and local schools when planning the PD. And five, there's a lack of focus on discipline-specific pedagogical content knowledge. And I included the link here to that study. Again, that was 6 years ago, but this is very much the same environment that we're seeing. Next slide, please. So as you can imagine, there's a number of issues related to equity that's connected to this. One, that there's many teachers who lack that self-efficacy for teaching computational thinking. And so if they're uncertain on how to teach it, that's going to be kind of passed on to their students who may be uncomfortable themselves in using computational thinking. For those that have been prepared, they're often the sole instructor of CT in their buildings or perhaps even in their districts. They may lack the resources necessary to teach in a way that meets all students' need. And again, their PD is often focused on the content, and there's really not those ongoing opportunities for collaboration and learning or really honing those pedagogical skills. And so next slide, please. One of the ways to potentially address this is to think about how technology can help to serve as a number of things for teacher preparation and support. Pre-pandemic, virtual online communities, digital learning for educators, all of these things were something that was very deep in my heart for actually probably about the past 15 years. I've been looking about this, but certainly as COVID hit, we all started thinking about different ways that we can both support student learning and educator learning. But one of the things that is critical to think about is how you're actually using that technology. And sometimes people sort of think it in the same ways, but there's really, and there could be others, but there were three main ways that I see often technology used when you're thinking about teacher preparation and support. One is technology as a simple repository. That is, you create a site, you dump a lot of resources, and it's a place where people can go find access to lesson plans, standards, materials, unplugged materials, et cetera, things for them to use in their classroom and basically take away what they need and go implement in the classroom. Technology can also be used as a connector, helping individuals to find others who are more well-versed or perhaps struggling just the same as being an inexperienced instructor of CT. And so as a way to kind of find others. People often do that on Twitter, like finding others that they can reach out to as part of their perhaps personal learning network. And then three, technology can be a conduit. So actually a way to kind of log into a space where you can connect to people and resources, but also kind of this deeper learning opportunity. And so as we think about that, next slide, please. Pre-pandemic, there are a number of places and spaces where there are these virtual teacher supports that are available specific to computational thinking and computer science. Prior to me being at the Friday Institute, I was at the American Institutes for Research and had been PI for the CS for All Teachers community, which was an NSF-funded virtual community for teachers of computer science. We often worked with presented resources to teachers who were perhaps the kindergarten teacher who had done an hour of code and wanted to kind of dig in more into how do you teach computational thinking in the classroom, or the science teacher who wanted to look at robotics and how to integrate robotics and computational thinking. So CS for All Teachers continues to be a place where teachers can go and to connect to others, individual teachers, as well as resources. The Computer Science Teachers Association, or CSTA, has been around for many, many years and doing in-person support through their chapters, but they have also increased that virtual support. And there are several others here that have provided, whether they are things like MOOCs, the online courses, to other resources and lesson plans, as you see there with some of the like code.org and ISTE. But I wanted to take a moment, next slide please, to kind of talk a little bit about an example from the field. And over the past year, I've been working with a group of collaborators on a project that we called Hindsight 2020. Like, we were getting clever with our thinking here and our naming, but thinking about the year 2020 and how that really did transform things and what people did in terms of how to support teachers with the PD. There was no longer an option to be face-to-face last summer. Everyone was having to transition to online and having to do it very quickly, some with just a couple of months notice, some with just a couple of weeks. And so through our project, we really were looking at what are these different ways that organizations responded. And we actually put together a guidebook, and the tiny URL is there. I can also put it in the chat for you. And in that guidebook, it included a lot of practical information from an inventory that we were able to gather. And then there was a number of case studies. Quinn worked with us on that project, and so we're super grateful for him on that. But one of the things that they were looking at, and this is just something to consider, again, kind of thinking in terms of equity and virtual PD. So one thing's like, okay, well, we give access to everyone. And so that can be a way that we can help to increase more teachers of computational thinking and all of those things. But they still were really critical in thinking about what is the psychological bandwidth to engage? Like, were teachers able to just simply have the mental space to be able to be part of PD, especially last summer? And again, that was a time where it was very difficult with the pandemic, but I would say even into the future. People sometimes make the mistake that technology can ease and mitigate a lot of these challenges. But what's the psychological bandwidth? Was there clarity around accessing course materials so people know they have a know-how for navigating the online platforms? And what about scheduling? And how does scheduling work for participants who maybe were balancing being at home with children, not having access to daycare and things like that? And so I use this as an example, and again, encourage people to take a look more deeply at the hindsight 2020 work, because it definitely brought to light ways in which the technology can be very powerful, but still the ways that we have to be mindful of issues of equity, not just for our students, but also for our teachers. Something that definitely came to mind as well is not all teachers have access to broadband. There's still a lot of places in this country where people aren't able to get on like this, like we can do. So I could go on and on about that, but I won't. But I will leave you with this question, just similar to Jill did earlier. And that is, next slide, please. Where have we seen bright spots in the field, particularly with the use of technology to mitigate challenges when it comes to equity and computational thinking? I'd love to hear if you all have some of those examples when we have our Q&A time. But with that, I'm going to turn things over to Quinn, who is going to go a little bit more deeply around teacher learning and computational thinking.
Great, thanks so much, Melissa. And I have a question at the end of my slides too, and then we'll have all three questions together. So again, we're really curious to see what you're all working on and what your thoughts are about this. Jill started talking about this quieter issue of definition and assessment. Melissa delved into more on what we're doing around professional development and teacher preparation. I'm going to go a little smaller. I think we started big, broad, and kind of moved down and talk a little bit about some of my work, Digital Promises work, really in micro-credentials around computational thinking, and kind of pivots right off of Melissa's points. I'll say one thing in terms of the conferencing, remake broadening. I think for a long time, not for a long time, but there was a good period of time there where we just felt like if we could just get some activities and platforms and tools, that would be enough to get more students engaged and a broader range of students engaged. And I think we've seen some real progress there. I think one of the things that I feel very strongly about, and I think my co-panelists would agree with too, is that we really do need to focus on this teacher preparation and getting teachers up and going. And Jill and Melissa's work speaks to that as well. And so I think there's going to be some redoubled efforts going forward about how we're going to work with teachers. It's a tough time to be a teacher in general right now. This is another thing that we're asking schools to do. So that's tough too. But anyway, I'll talk a little bit about how I think micro-credentials may be able to offer some insight and some progress. Next slide. So this goes to what Melissa just kind of shared, so I won't spend too much time on this, but there's 1,200 teacher education programs in the country. 80% of them approximately requires a digital technology course. But as many of us know, sometimes this digital technology course is still doing things like Google Slides and how to use Prezi. These are not bad tool sets, but they're probably not worth a whole semester worth of time. When I was down in South Carolina at the College of Charleston, I worked real hard to try to get a little bit more robust technology course in place and try to move that towards CT. And 2 steps forward, 3 steps back on some of that work. But basically right now, we're really not preparing CS teachers from undergraduate education. So we're not getting pre-service teachers coming out to school districts with this background. Every once in a while, they'll have some background in block-based or coding themselves just based on their own volition or their own education at this point in time. But our schools are not really doing that. Next slide. The reality then is that most of the teachers still, and this is from the National Survey of Science and Mathematics Education, are teaching CS on the high school level, middle school level, elementary, with no credentials absolutely at all. They have a credential in other areas, and there's this math and science on the high school level, ELA. The good news is this gives us a broad range of teachers who are offering CS and CT, but we don't really have any way of actually credentialing this, and that makes a difference. Credentialing and teacher endorsement is really important, and it's going to give us sort of a flavor of where we're at nationally in terms of our teacher workforce. Next slide. So one of the areas that has been kind of growing momentum is this notion of micro-credentials. And I think everybody knows a bit about what we mean by micro-credentials, but I'll take a moment just to talk about how it's conceptualized with digital promise. We focus on competencies, so you have to actually demonstrate understanding in a certain area. I'll talk about CT and the different facets and different competencies that we focus on with CT in a moment. They're personalized in the sense that they're specific to that individual. They're job embedded. At Digital Promise, we rely on you having access to students or classroom, whether remote or in person. And then they're shareable and stackable. The notion is that a micro-credential in one area can be built upon and built upon and built upon. And then there's things that you can actually transfer from school to school, district to district, and move forward accordingly. Let me just say one thing about how we do micro-credentials at Digital Promise. We do rely on teachers being able to have access to a classroom. You would submit anywhere from 2 to 3 samples of your own student work. Sometimes that's submitted via URLs, Dropboxes, shared drives. You would submit your accompanying lesson plans, and you would submit a reflection, which is anywhere from about 1.5 pages to 3 pages, talking about the work you did, the student work you're submitting, and why you did what you did with your lessons. That's reviewed externally in a matter of 2 weeks, and we'll get back to you with direct feedback and say you either have earned that particular credential or here's some key feedback and we'd like you to resubmit. Go to the next slide. So these are the 10 micro-credentials. I mean, Jill was talking about Mitchell Resnick and Karen Brennan's piece about concept, practices, and perspectives. We don't have anything about perspectives, but we do have our concepts, which are at the top there in purple. And then our practices are down below. And I'm not going to read through all of them, but they're 5 and 5. These are 10 micro-credentials that we offer to middle school teachers around CT. So it's important to designate it's not for high school or elementary, but for middle school. That's where they're really geared toward. They're geared towards integrating CT with an existing subject matter. When you click on any one of these, they'll give you an overview of the competency. I'll do analyzing, communicating with data, which tends to be one of our more popular ones as a starting point. Talk about what data means, different ways it can be integrated, whether in social studies, science, mathematics, and then give an overall criteria and rubric of how we want to see this entailed within a middle school classroom. These are 10 of the 300 different micro-credentials that Digital Promise is currently offering with 40 different providers. But as you said, the concepts are on top and the practices are on the bottom. To date, we've seen a lot more activity around the concepts as opposed to practices. And some of that has to do with documentation. With practices, you have to rely a little bit more on documenting through video, which, as many people here know, can be a little bit more clunky in terms of submission. And let's go to the next slide. So state departments of education are recognizing some of the real challenges we're having with getting certification and endorsement. And they're also recognizing that schools of education, having so much to already do, are not necessarily picking up the mantle here for pre-service education. So really right now, it's about in-service teachers. And you can see these are not per se all around CT, although we're currently working with the state of Virginia and we're doing some work that I'll talk about in a minute with Kentucky. And both of those states right now do allow for continuing credit hours based upon endorsement through micro-credentials in CT. Code VA just made some moves with the General Assembly, so we were connecting with them on that. And Kentucky has already had that in place for a few years. So this is in the water right now. What we're lacking is a lot more in terms of empirical research about how to best enact micro-credentials. How do we dovetail PD with micro-credential submission, which is still kind of a blank zone in terms of research. And on that note, let me go to my last slide here. Well, I have 2 slides, but let me just talk about a case study of what we're doing right now. There's a lot of text here, but a lot of images. We're working over in East Kentucky on an NSF grant, and we're going into year 3 right now. And it's about bringing K through 8 coding into Kentucky Appalachia, which is an area that was really hit hard by the departure of coal industry. And we are also working, there's 2 school districts you can see up there in the right-hand corner, Pikeville School District and Floyd County School District. And we're also working with the Kentucky Valley Education Cooperative as our endorser to have teacher leaders complete micro-credentials on the middle school level. And we're focusing right now on creating algorithms and working with data as our starting point, as our two MCs. Melissa was touching upon the ramifications of COVID, and working with her on Eager 2020. It was really interesting seeing how many different PD providers are dealing with some of these issues. We had to go all remote, and we ended up dropping the number of micro-credential submissions in half. We were hoping to get 25. Instead, we focused on 12 teachers and some of the more experienced teachers in these two districts. The good news is we did get 12 micro-credential submissions, and I was proud to say that all 12 got endorsed in either using algorithms or working with data. We're currently talking to KVEC and getting continuing credit hours and then starting to scale that work up. And we're going to use these 12 teachers as sort of coaches and teacher leaders in micro-credentials who will then walk others through the process. We think this is a good approach. It's a district approach. It's specific to a particular area, and we're trying to leverage educators on the ground to do it. When we wrote this grant, though, we did not immediately assume that this was going to be endorsement and certification. The reason when we were putting it together was we just wanted to make sure that the PD was being enacted. There's studies out there saying that up to 60–65% of what teachers do in PD never results in any genuine change in classroom practice. So purely the point I want to make here is that micro-credentials can be a powerful conduit just in terms of making sure the teachers are enacting what they got from the PD that summer and making sure it gets into classrooms. And so that's the way we conceived it initially. But now with KVEC in place and some of the existing partnerships with the two districts with KVEC, I think we'll have an opportunity moving forward on that. We'll go to the next slide. So if you're interested in learning more, there's a link there. You got my email. And I do have a question, so we'll go to the last slide now. What are the biggest challenges to CT through this equity lens from your perspectives? I see teacher development as a huge component, but that may not be your sense of things. There may be some more fundamental challenges that we really need to think about, including definition and really targeted improvements. So Tiffany, if we go to the last slide, I think we'll have all three questions there. I'm going to stop talking, and I'm wondering what people think about Jill's question, Melissa's question, and the question I just added for my own. Interested to hear a little bit more about all of you on the call and get any thoughts.
Especially with such a small group, feel free to unmute yourself and be willing to say it verbally. It doesn't have to be in the chat.
I'm happy to chime in first, get us going. My name's Alex Dreyer. I am the Associate Director of Online Learning at the Friday Institute. In full disclosure, I am part of Melissa's team. So hi, Melissa. And Quinn, I worked for, pushing now like 6 years closely with Digital Promise on all of our micro-credential work, really closely with Odelia and Kristen. And in that team, we've got a whole host of them. So it's definitely something we're very much interested in and continue to pursue. So I think you're doing great work there. One question I had was around thinking through some of the what are some approaches you have seen to addressing some of these inequities, some of these challenges that you've described. Because to me, it's a lot easier to just see. Some of the challenge you're going to have fewer qualified teachers in a district with more marginalized students than you are in other districts, stuff like that. So I'm just wondering, what are some promising approaches that you've seen to address some of these issues that have been raised or that are fairly intuitive?
Alex, I can weigh in just real quick, and I don't want to just be talking about my work the whole time here, but CT Pathways is a program that we started when I first moved over to Digital Promise. We're really district facing, and selfishly, Digital Promise is very district facing, so it's convenient for us. But I don't think state departments of education, I think 49, 50, Illinois just went through. I think all 50 states have CS standards in place, but I think districts need to take a greater role in interpreting those standards for their schools and take some leadership there. So what we did with CT Pathways, we did that, which kind of goes to what Jill was talking about, some of refining definition and getting a definition that's district specific. So there's some of that definition that needs to be done. But then what we also do is we work with districts that have already identified equity or inclusivity issues. So like when Iowa City came to us and said, we have a huge Latinx population and we have 2 schools that are predominantly Latinx, but we have no offerings of CT there. Well, we jumped at that because they had already defined it, because you can't define that stuff for districts and you can't define it for schools. They've got to, I mean, you can yell into the distance and say, this is something you need to look at, but until districts take that ownership of themselves, like we kind of can't, so anyway, I'm not sure if I'm really answering your question, but we're right now with that, we started with 3 districts and we're up to 10 districts right now, but every single district we work with starts with that issue of equity and inclusion. It can be girls, it could be Title I, it could be Black, Latinx students. But once they come to us and say, we want to improve our numbers here in access, I think that's a good starting point. But the districts start that conversation, as opposed to others telling us, oh, you need to fix this, you need to fix that. So anyway, that's one thing that I think we felt pretty good about here, in terms of work.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Other questions or responses to the questions that we had posed to you all?
Hi, I had a question. I'm Rosta Farzan. I'm associate professor in the School of Computing and Information at the University of Pittsburgh. I particularly work with youth and focusing more on data science literacy development. And so I have been working in this area and kind of community-driven learning of data science and technology, STEM-related technologies. And so I've worked more like in informal learning setting, after-school programs. So my question was, how do you see like the effectiveness of informal learning environment as opposed to things that are more embedded maybe into the classroom education? And yeah, so if one is more effective than others, then how do we kind of pursue that?
It's great to see you. I was at your talk earlier today. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I think we need both. I mean, I think the work that Quinn and Melissa are doing to train teachers is essential, because if we're really going to reach all students, we need to get into the school districts. We need to demystify what computational thinking and computer science is, and we need to bring it to our school districts. But there's so many constraints on what schools can do. And so the informal setting is really where a lot of the innovation has happened in the past and continues to happen. And there's some wonderful programs I'm sure you're aware of that have done that. And I think we've not only reached a number of youth there and been able to have broader community and family engagement in the informal setting, but also have learned a lot that then we can also take to the formal setting and apply. So I think we need them all. That's my understanding, and I don't think anybody would argue with me. And so I think, again, the work that I heard you doing with kind of putting youth in charge and designing and addressing critical problems, that's real hard to do in many public schools, maybe in some private and charter schools, but as you know, the public schools where a lot of our youth who aren't getting access, it's harder to do there. So I applaud the work you're doing, and thank you for bringing up informal. Yeah.
I would also, is it okay if I add on?
Yeah.
I would also add on that, kind of related to Dr. Washington's keynote. We obviously know that there continue to be, systemic issues with racism and discrimination in other ways. And informal settings can spark interest in computer science and computational thinking in ways that maybe, traditional K-12 is not. And so, by not, I guess I'm saying it's a means to broaden their interest informally that then can hopefully then overlap with formal education. Because if you get the coding bug or the programming bug through this summer camp or after school opportunity, and then you all helping to encourage them to say, okay, we'll go look to your schools. What do you have available? This is you can actually take courses. That might be another way that we can kind of combine efforts to work against some of those systemic ways of oppression that we currently have, sort of meeting it in two different directions.
That was a great point. Thanks, both Jill and Melissa for. So I wanted to just then maybe add a follow-up question if I don't want to take too much time. But so a challenge that we have faced in our work, I work mostly with marginalized communities, mostly Black communities actually, and that their time there's a lot of demand on their time. Many of them actually have to work. So then that's kind of the challenge that we've been facing of making sure that we do get enough engagement when we do have like after school that they need to not commit extra time. We always pay for their participation. So as a way that's kind of at least compensate for the time they put, but still we always compete with other things that they need to be doing. So I just wanted, like, if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I think what you said is what I've seen has been successful, right? If youth are not able to attend because they need to work, then create a situation where this could be part of their work. If youth cannot attend because they're caring for siblings or they have responsibilities at home, again, finding ways to structure it so that the timing works around when they potentially could be free, and or creating opportunities for younger siblings. I mean, assuming they're not infants or something. If it's elementary school kids that the high schoolers are taking care of, there's ways to create opportunities so that both are getting those. But it's a real challenge. But the work, paying them as though it's work, because it is work, right? Paying them for their work.
Exactly. Yeah.
As opposed to, assuming that this is an opportunity for you, that they have the privilege of coming in without pay is one that we have to really dismantle. Yeah.
The other piece that I would also say is like to encourage you to think about, and this came through in our totally different scenario, but similar train of thought. Like it came through in our Hindsight 2020 study where we were looking at the ways that we think about time. And that time, especially with virtual learning and connectivity. So why not think too about what are some ways that you can shape the program if you know that your time is limited with them face-to-face and synchronously, so everybody in the same place at the same time to learn together, then why not think about shaping that learning in such a way that it's like, okay, when we come together, this is what we do. But then when you have to go and in between your work and other things, what are the things that you can be doing independently, asynchronously, to try to test things, to try them out or whatever, so that there's more intentionality about how you use that space, literal space and time when you're all together. That is something that these virtual professional development programs did. They really rethought the calendar and the scheduling to say, okay, we know that people are pulled in different directions. We know that we do not want to replicate, I'm not saying you would either, but we did not want to replicate like trying to make what would normally be an 8-hour face-to-face day. No one wants to do 8 hours on Zoom. So instead, chunking it out differently, and again, kind of allowing them to, just use your time differently. Is there a way to, if there's, you want to teach them how to do something, could you create instructional videos that they can access? And I think a part of that too would obviously be, do they have access to the sorts of equipment and materials that they would need to do, do some of that independently at home? Or it could even be like, listen, I can be watching a video while I'm taking the bus to work. You know what I mean? Like just thinking creatively and differently about time, so that when you do have the opportunity to be together, knowing that it's limited, you're optimizing it in a way that can really be helpful.
Thank you.
Other thoughts, reactions, questions? As you can see, we're open books here. We'll do our best to answer as much as we can.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zarina, and I am a PhD student, but working with Chandra and actually Eleanor in this project where we have professional development lined up with teachers, helping them to infuse CT into their classrooms. And last year, we had planned to be working with several schools. We had purchased photon robots for each each school classroom set, individual sets and whatnot. But we had experienced a lot of difficulties with getting into the school. And I think there was a lot of, I guess they had a lot of priorities, obviously, last year. And we were kind of low on the totem pole. So in the end, a whole year of, I think we met with our teachers only one time, that we had to rethink our entire grant and how can we actually get working with teachers. And so in the summer, we changed everything. We, instead of working with a specific school and working with all of their 3 through 5 math and science teachers, we recruited teachers in the district, so opened it up to the entire district. And we got 10 or 11 teachers from voluntary, and now we're working with them and hoping to meet with them. But that whole idea of equity, initially we wanted to work with teachers in a district, in a school that maybe they were hesitant, and it's not like they initially sought us out. We were working with teachers that maybe were uncomfortable with computational thinking and coding. And now this was a volunteer opportunity for them that they're getting paid, but they signed up. So even though I'm so happy to be working with these teachers, and some of them have already shown that they're not very comfortable and confident, and I'm happy that they are in our program. But what about those teachers? Like, how do we reach those teachers, I guess, that would not have signed up, but they probably could benefit from something like this? And then kind of that whole circle of, well, the teachers that could benefit are not signing up because they're not confident, and because they're not signing up for something like this, they're not confident. And so that perpetuates the circle. And last year we like tried to do that. We tried to work with a school that had a department head and the principal that was very engaged, but the teachers not so much. And that was evident when we reached out to that school, and only one person who was with us initially actually volunteered to sign up. So just that idea of the teachers that want to learn are signing up, and that's great because we're reaching those teachers. But the teachers that initially like don't want to sign up, there's that like whole equity. It's again to creating that gap between the teachers. So
you hit on so many issues that we talk about a lot with our team. One, you are not alone. There were many folks that over the past year have had to do like multiple no-cost extensions and, look for ways in which, just kind of revise their thinking. So that certainly is something that impacted a lot of people. Similarly, I often struggled with getting people interested in joining our virtual community of practice, because they're like, oh, what's the point of that? Like, I don't want to do it. And it's like, you can't understand the value of the community of practice unless you join, but you won't join unless you understand the value of the community of practice. So it's like chicken and egg, like kind of thing. But in your case, I think if you do have folks who, are willing to do it and are those trailblazers, and there typically is that too. It's like the people that are most likely to make it happen. They'll be the ones to raise their hand and volunteer. But I think there's a lot to say for that kind of peer-to-peer influence and kind of positive peer pressure. Like, continue to work with those folks. And my personal thinking, and Quinn and Jill, I'd love to hear from you too, particularly when you're talking about elementary teachers. I think it's I kind of came into this world of computer science and computational thinking with zero background. I was a former 3rd grade teacher, but I got connected to this space because of my work with teachers online, not specific to computer science or computational thinking. And so I had my own sense of like fear and lack of confidence in the beginning. Even just communicating with like great minds like Jill and Quinn, I'm like, these people know way more than I do. Once I started digging into it though, and really looking at computational thinking, I saw where there were so many parallels to other things that we did teach. I'm like, oh, patterns or, this, like I taught that in 3rd grade. That was like storyboarding or whatever. And algorithms, I just didn't use that term. And so basically I'm just wondering, like, maybe working with those trailblazers who are willing, and then thinking about ways that they can help share their learning with their colleagues. They're going to trust their colleagues more than they're going to trust you. So if they hear from a colleague hey, this is really cool, and look at what I've been doing because of this, they're more apt to get engaged than hearing from some folks that they're like, I don't know who Zarina and Eleanor is, and like, why do I care to talk to them? But if my neighbor across the hall shows me this cool thing, I don't know, Quinn, Jill.
Yeah,
anything
no,
else to
I mean,
add?
you just said it. I won't say anything more. I've taught high school English for 7 years, so I came in like Melissa, sort of in a different way. But I do know that when I was sitting in PD, there was always, if there were teachers in my school that I would listen to. And when they brought in the outside consultants, that's when I started rolling my eyes and sitting in the back. And some of the outside consultants were great. And I find myself in that role these days, but Melissa's totally right. And I think a lot of you would agree. Yeah, really leverage your champions and then try to make it a values element, because I think it really is a values type of thing. And I think, Serena, I'll just put a little thing in chat. There was a good report that came out called CS for What, tying this to values. And I just put it in the chat. It reads long, but there's a lot of pictures, so it's not too heavy. But that might be something you want to share with some of your teachers, because I think Melissa's spot on. You really want to create champions and do this as a leadership development thing. I think that's so key.
Yeah, I'll just add that, we've had the same struggles too, and it's not uncommon. Two things that seem to be working in the schools that I'm in. One is meeting the teachers where they're at. Most teachers want help with tech support. So that tech support is not computer science or computational thinking, but we found that if we can help them with tech support and teach them some kind of nifty tech and ed tech tools, we can weave in some computational thinking, some computer science. So we're meeting their needs rather than layering on a new need. And the other way is, you mentioned principals and getting principals on board. The elementary school we've been the most successful in had a champion principal who started by demystifying computer science and computational thinking for herself, as well as for her teachers, and eased them into it, but required it for the school. And so, once she was on board and the teachers actually respect her, they followed suit. But it's not a perfect world, and it's not as easy as I just made it sound. But those are the two ways that have worked: meeting them where they're at, finding out what they want, doing that, and then layering the CS in there and getting those champions, whether they're teachers or principals. But thank you for bringing that up.
Does anyone have any bright spots that they would like to share? You can feel okay about bragging about yourself too, of things that you think have been going really well that others may benefit from.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what do you mean by bright spots?
That's just a term like to think about where are some places that are doing things well, that
Okay.
have been able to move things forward and find some success. I think
I've never heard that before. So I was
think I
thinking,
borrowed that
bright
term from
spots can be good, but also can be bad because you can't see. So I was trying to figure out, are you looking for challenges or successes?
Yes, that's
Okay.
true. I'll
That
say
makes
bright
sense.
spots, not blind spots. So that we'll put it that way. Yeah, I think I borrowed that from another PD that was part of.
Well, I want to add this because I think it's important to acknowledge that there are bright spots in our work. And for me, it's really the youth that participates. They're, given the challenges that I mentioned, I'm always impressed by still their engagement and their willingness and their interest in kind of participating in this and learning. So for me, they are the bright spots.
What is the name of your program? We'd love to hear it. I know Jill said she participated, but if others weren't part of your session.
Always kind of depending kind of on what we're like right now. We're running one program called Digital Champions that we are training high school students to become kind of digital ambassadors in their communities and support local businesses. The other program that I talked about earlier is called, it's like a data science literacy program as well. So that again, like we're engaging high school students in using data in developing campaigns to make changes within their communities.
Wow, those are both wonderful.
Thanks.
Oh, Zarina, Eleanor, and Chandra, did you all want to share your program? I think that you said the three of you were working together.
Zarina shared a lot about it, but yeah, we're running for 3rd through 5th grade elementary school teachers. We're running a program for computational thinking, integrating into math and science classrooms for teachers in Massachusetts, where we are at UMass Dartmouth. And I came into grad school until this September. It's my first year not teaching. I did K through 6 computer science. So I was working in the lovely district with a, as you were saying, with a administrator who himself did not have any background in computer science, but learned the value of CT and CS and knew that it was something that students needed to know. And we were a Title I district that did not necessarily have the funding for CS, but through grants and other opportunities, we're able to bring that to our students because my admin felt that it was necessary, and that was how it happened. So it definitely can happen as people learn the value of these things for students.
And one of the bright spots from our project, which is called Computational Thinking Counts, is that despite all the problems last year, we have been able to recruit 10 teachers this year, and 7 of those 10 are at a single elementary school. And that's something that the teachers themselves did. That's not something that the administrators did. So we're really excited to be working with them.
And we actually are meeting with them in person this week, which is exciting because it's the first time we're actually going to be working with teachers, not just Zoom pictures. So that's a bright spot.
I just want to say that I think it's a bright spot that there's so many people here that are former teachers, right? And that you're involved in the conversation. So it's really inspiring to hear that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all. We appreciate this. And I think Tiffany has some instructions to close us out today.
Yes, thank you all for sharing about your work and your questions. I'm going to just share screen so that way you all are able to see our session facilitators' contact information if you'd like to get in touch. And I just have a quick closing announcement. So we'll do our welcome and announcement sessions now, and we hope you could still join us. And to get there, just go back to Swap Card and look at the agenda, and it should be there for you at 5. And then tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, or wherever you might be located, will be another great day of interactive sessions, starting with a morning welcome and a couple of important short talks from NSF leaders. And then after that will be the gallery walk. If you haven't already, feel free to use time tonight on Swap Card to scope out those posters and demos in the gallery and sign up for sessions you want to attend. And feel free to check out everything else that is scheduled for tomorrow. And then as a final note, there is an optional after hours gathering in Wonder, which will start at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, 3:30 p.m. Pacific, and run for about an hour and a half. It's informal, so drop by, say hi to other participants who join, maybe meet someone new. And the Wonder platform is a bit different than Zoom or Swap Card, but something fun to check out. And if you can't make it, don't worry. We'll plan to come back to Swap Card tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific and 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you again.